Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm so happy to see so many names joining. This is just introduction, so don't worry if you're still getting set up. Thank you for joining us. Today's presenter is Laura Ledray. She will be talking about collaboration with design, all of these changes with the processes, and I'm sure that a lot of you will have questions for her. Remember that you can just add your question in the chat. You don't have to wait until the end. It's more like a conversation, but if you want to wait, it's okay. We will have a Q&A time too. So about Laura, she started at Nextiva 6 weeks ago as a new design team project manager with applause for her. She's doing a Devs&Bytes and she's new. So thank you so much, Laura, for doing this. She's based out of San Diego, California. Her previous work experience is in IT help desk management and marketing. Since starting at Nextiva, Laura has worked with the Atlassian team to clarify and implement changes to the design process and conducted trainings for designers and product managers to explain those changes. So this is part of that journey. And we will be making this presentation available for new hires so everyone is still on the same page. So take advantage and just ask your questions. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone, if you're interested in presenting, just reach out to either any Terry page or myself, just like any EX team member, and we will make it happen. And I think that's all I've got, Laura. Thank you for doing this.
Of course. Thank you, Norma. So I will get started. And yes, I know I'm based out of San Diego, so half of you probably hate me. Yes, we do always have beautiful weather, though today, ironically, it was cloudy, so I stayed inside most of the day. So since I started, the design process recently changed a couple of weeks prior to my start, but then after doing one-on-ones with a bunch of the designers, I realized there was still a lot of confusion, both on the product manager side and the design side. So that's partially what this presentation is going to be going over. But then also we're going to be talking about specifically how this relates to the work you do as developers or members of the QA team, and kind of specifically at what stages in the design process do people actually need your help as developers? And then also, how is it possible for you to get help from the designers when you may have questions on the epics that you're working on or the Figma links? So that's what we'll be going through today. It'll be pretty short and sweet, so we'll have lots of time for questions and should be able to get done here before the top of the hour. Okay, so this is the design process. It looks a little bit intimidating, but I'm just going to walk through it for the next couple of minutes. So to start, what happens is a product manager obviously works off of the epic with the development team to figure out what's needed for the Nextiva products. So they go in and they fill out a DSN design request ticket within Jira. And once it's created, it's set automatically to new and assigned to that PM. And then at that stage, the PM can leave it in that stage as long as they want until they're ready to actually talk with a designer. And then they set it to ready for grooming as the status. And that's that little section in the upper right corner of Jira. So the exact same as it looks on the developer and QA tickets. And then at that point, Ray, who is our senior director of the design team, actually goes in and assigns it to a designer or multiple designers. And then at that point, the PM actually goes in and schedules a meeting with the designer to figure out what the heck is going on and what they need to know, and figures out things like due dates and the specifications for the actual design request. And at this point, you guys might actually get invited, especially as developers, if the PMs think you should be a part of those initial conversations. But more likely than not, you'll get involved a little bit later on. So once the designer thinks, okay, I understand what's going on, I've had all the grooming sessions that I need, then they change the status to do. And at this point, it can stay in this status for several days or even a couple of weeks if the designer is working on other priorities, but they always communicate that to the PM and have a collaboration and conversation about that. And then once they're finally ready to start, they set the status to in progress. And this is a very elaborate process that I'll be going through in a little bit more detail in the next couple of slides. But this is actually a stage of the process where you guys as developers in QA might get involved if the designers have questions. And then once they're done with all of that, there are actually 3 statuses for awaiting approval, and that recently changed as of less than a month ago. And the first one is awaiting design approval. So when a ticket is at awaiting design approval, it means the designer is meeting with the entire design team, getting feedback, making changes, updating their Figma design. And then once that's done, Ray or Paul, as the managers of the design team, decide, does Tomas or anyone else from the C-suite team need to see this? And if they think yes, then Ray will set up that meeting with Tomas or other key executive stakeholders and do the design meeting with them to get their feedback and approval. So after that awaiting executive approval, once they sign off on it, then it goes to awaiting PM approval, which is just like it sounds. It's the final approval stage, and that's when the product manager goes in, checks the Figma link, makes their comments, and then approves or denies it. And then any design rework may be going on at that point. So 3 sets of approvals, and then it gets to you guys, developers and QA members. And that's when the ticket is set to this development in progress stage. And at that point, it's actually no longer assigned to the designer, it gets assigned to the PM. So the designer's not even looking at the ticket. So just so you're aware of that, if you comment on that and expect to get a response, unless you @mention them, they're not going to get those responses. So the PM is in charge of moving it through the Epic process and all the processes that you guys go through with coding and developing out whatever the design is. And then also same with QA, they're working directly with you guys to go through everything that you need to do to get it tested. And then obviously that process, as you all know, could take several days or weeks depending on the design. And then once you're all done with your pieces, the PM goes in and sets it back to validate design as the status for the DSN. And then they assign it back to the designer. At this point, the designer is just going in and doing their last minute checks on the actual process and seeing, are there any discrepancies between what they created and what was actually developed. And then once they're completely done with that and making bug tickets, they set it to complete. And so that's a brief overview, but as I mentioned, for these 3 colored boxes, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. So specifically with the in progress status, there's actually a lot going on the design side that you guys as developers may or may not be aware of. So the designers are actually doing a discovery phase where they're researching competitors, seeing what other products look like, see if we can do a design that's better or similar to that. They're going through wireframing and prototyping and UI design and thinking about the customer experience. They might even be interviewing customers or potential customers to see what types of designs resonate better with them and which are more user-friendly. And then they're also doing a ton of documentation on their side to explain why they're doing certain things in the design process. So they have all of that information and figuring out if we have any existing design system components that they can actually be using. So while this is going on, from what all the designers told me is they really feel like the development team in particular, it would be great to get feedback from them during this process. And so I explained to them that obviously it's a DSN ticket, and if it's set to in progress, they're in charge of it. And so be aware that you might start seeing, if you haven't already, you either getting invited by the designer themselves or the product manager invited into meetings during this in progress status for the DSN. And no one's trying to waste your time. It's because the designer actually has valid questions that they want to ask you. And they're trying to do this to kind of avoid doing a lot of rework, because I've heard that a number of times there have been designs that have been finalized and Tomas has seen them and approved them. And then when it comes time for you guys to develop it, maybe it can't be done for various reasons, or it just looks different than the design. And then people get upset, which is never good. And then rework has to be done and waste everyone's time. So that is why that stage is very key from the designer perspective to get feedback. And then everything they do is put into a Figma link, which is what you guys should be building off of. And then also when it's in the development in progress stage that I mentioned, this is when the ball is solely in development in QA's court. If you guys ever need help from a designer, make sure you schedule a meeting with the designer, and you can schedule it with the PM as well, or ask the PM to schedule it. But honestly, the PMs are so busy, I would recommend taking the initiative and scheduling it yourselves. The designers' calendars are always up to date. So if you ever have an issue where they're not responding to your questions, if you're mentioning them on the Epic, or or they're not coming to these meetings, please let me know and I will definitely talk to them and figure out what's going on for you guys. But in general, if you make it very clear to them that you need their help for clarification on the design, they should be more than happy to help because, again, it's going to save them time later on as well when they have to do the validate design process. And then, as I mentioned as well, you can always @mention the designer. That's just where you use the @ in their name within Jira and ask them a quick question. But as we know, sometimes there's lots of questions, or maybe you think the answer is going to be relatively complicated. And so it's probably better to just schedule a quick meeting with the designer and the PM at that point. So what is a Figma design and why are they important? Well, apparently people until relatively recently on the development team were actually going in and just using screenshots to try to develop the actual designs, which is not good because oftentimes those are outdated and they're not showing you all the specs and the spacing information needed to build the design a lot faster and correctly. And so I cannot stress this enough. Always make sure you are using the finalized Figma link to do building or any QA testing. And so I would hope that the PM puts it directly in the Epic for you, but if you don't see it there, you can always look at that list of other links to Jira tickets, find the DSN one, click in there, and you will see the Figma link either listed just like this with Patrice's comment as a link, and then you know to just click in there and sign in through the Okta page with Nextiva, or you'll see something called designs just like this, and you can click open in Figma and it will take you to the design. And usually there's only one link per design, but sometimes if a request is super large, you might see 2 links. But if you're ever confused which one to look at, of course, just reach out to the designer and ask them to clarify for you. And again, the design is not necessarily ready until it's set to that development in progress stage. And so I understand a lot of times you guys as developers want to go in, start working on some of the code and the back end stuff for a design. But realize the design could be changing up until it's gone through those 3 approval processes, and even sometimes after they have to go back and redo approvals from different people. And so until you see it as set as in development or development in progress, you might have to redo the work that you've done already. So be very careful with that because obviously no one wants to waste their precious time here at Nextiva. And then at the validate design stage, this is where you guys are completely done with your work. QA's done everything on their end and it's back in the designer's hands. This is where the designer is going in and creating 1 bug ticket directly on that epic per discrepancy that they're seeing. And so I just have a screenshot here of what those bug tickets look like. And then once that's done, the designer marks the DSN request as complete. And so that ticket is closed. So you might ask, well, how the heck am I supposed to get in contact with them if I have questions about what bugs they logged? Well, luckily for you, because they logged them themselves, they're listed as the reporter. So if you actually go into the bug and just @mention them or comment for them, they will see that and it will go directly to their email and they'll know that they need to respond to you about questions you have about the bugs. But again, with this as well, make sure you're just setting up meetings with them and possibly with the PMs as well if you think that's warranted, especially if it's a bigger project where there was a lot of bugs that they logged. Now, in general, obviously, we've talked about how you can get your questions answered if you have them about a specific DSN request ticket. But what if you have just more general questions about the design process or the design system, or even just an overall strategy question? Like maybe you want to know what the design team is looking at working on first and see if it aligns with what development and QA are doing. Well, we have a channel called Design Inquiries, which is in Slack. However, after going in there and talking with Ray and Paul, it's a bit of a bummer because a lot of good information and questions that people ask have been getting lost and they can't be referred to later because it's just in a Slack channel and not super searchable. And then also sometimes you guys ask great questions as devs, but then a designer who has no idea about the project that you're asking about ends up responding anyway, trying to be helpful. But it creates a circular conversation because you're not actually talking to the designer who's actually working on the request. And so the other designer might be providing inaccurate information. And so to avoid that, I had the Atlassian team create a Jira form. So if you go into Jira and just hit create at the top, just like this shows in the screenshot, then if you go to the project as design and the issue type is design inquiry, it's a very basic form. The only two required fields other than these two are the summary, which is just the title of your question, and description. Then it automatically adds you as a reporter. Now, something we did do is right after this meeting, the design inquiries Slack channel is going to go to read only, and I'm going to post these instructions as part of the description as well. But be aware that if you make a design inquiry ticket within Jira, there's going to be a notification that still goes into that Slack channel. And the PMs requested this, so there was still transparency, and so they could see what great questions people are asking in case it applies to them. Or maybe you as a developer, it'll apply to what you're doing as well. So you guys will still be able to see those notifications. Those just won't be the place where you're going to be asking those questions in the future. And so again, the reason for this form, because it's a little bit annoying to have to fill out a form just versus slacking a bunch of people, is so Ray and Paul can actually go in and assign it to the correct person so that you actually get the correct response instead of, again, these circular conversations. And then this way we can even link it to existing DSN tickets or epics and kind of keep everything in one place and be better about tracking information as we go forward here at Nextiva. And that is all I had. And right after this slide, just FYI, there are some links to the design process, the design inquiries form, how to do that, and then a quick video tutorial that kind of walks through in greater detail the design process as well. So if you guys look up this presentation after Norma posts it, that information will be available as well at the end. So thank you. And does anyone have any questions? As I said, very short and sweet.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for doing this. We have one comment. Great presentation from Scott. Thank you,
Thanks,
Scott.
Scott's on my team.
Oh, awesome. Okay, Julio has some questions. Julio, do you want to unmute yourself? You can just like unmute if you have several questions.
Hi, Laura. Thank you, Norma. Well, I have some questions about the experience in Nextiva here. The first one is, does exist the concept of book in the design, or it will be like a new design or a new version of the design, or how it will be handled? Example, we need in development have some specifications, but the design are not fulfilling those specifications that are given by business. Is that a book, or it requires a new design from scratch, or how it's going to be working?
I couldn't really understand what the question was. Are you saying if something needs to be changed, will a new design be created? Is that correct?
Right. Example, if the design it is not addressing the specification by business, some reason, there can be a lot. What is the process for that?
Yeah, so if it's not something that was addressed in the original DSN, but it relates to one that's still open, you can talk to the PM and they can go in and talk with the designer and add that to part of the process. That's kind of what those initial grooming sessions are for, is for them to go back in and really make sure they're understanding the entire scope of the project. But if it's something, let's say, that you need a button added to a settings page, and that settings page was created a month ago and the DSN ticket is long closed, then you would just go in and talk to the PM and have them create a new design request. And so that's, again, just going into Jira, hitting create, choosing design, and then the design request from the issue type dropdown.
Okay, thank you. The next one is about books that are raised by the designers against developers. What happens, or how it is going to be handled? Example, if the developers started to work on something urgent before it were completed the design, or it will approve it. It has happened in the past that is raised as a book when the specification or the design was not ready. So from developer perspective, or how we are working, is not a book, it is a new feature, because we don't have the specification and the moment that we started. Maybe in the moment that we are delivering to RC, there is the specification done, it is accepted, but not when we started. Maybe it took like 1 month to develop that part. In that case, how is going to be handled? Is always a bug, or is a new feature, or how to handle this?
Yeah, so that's what I was talking about, where until it's set at the design request, until it's set at development in progress, it's not ready, right? So if you have to go in and do work before, I understand that that's something that might happen, or they might be pressuring you guys to try to get stuff done quickly. But at the end of the day, Tomas hasn't seen it, right? So I've heard several stories already where he's looked at a design, he's approved it, and then you guys do all your great work developing, and then he looks at the design link again and says, well, where are all these things that are missing? And then he's upset, and then you all end up doing the work all over again. So again, it's really something you shouldn't be touching until it's in that development in progress status. And the PM has come to you and said, boom, here's the finalized Figma link. Now, obviously, if you have to go in and do back-end work before, I get that. And I don't know exactly what the PMs communicate to you guys about those situations, but you might have to redo some of the work. And that's why I just say it as a caveat and as a cautionary thing, that until it's set and all the 3 approvals have happened, the design is not ready and could still be being reworked up until that development in progress status.
Okay. And the last one is related with the first one. Is there the concept of versioning for the designs? Example, we have the first iteration, it is done, and a couple of months later, it is decided that requires something else or some change. How can we check the versioning of those designs?
Yeah, so at that point, if it's already where the design request has been closed and then someone comes back and says, oh, I don't like this, we need to change it again, especially with Connect, obviously, because we're working on building that as a new product, you do just have to have the PM create a new design request ticket, because at that point, it's already been closed. If it happens like it's a day or like less than 2 weeks afterwards and someone says, oh, crap, this isn't what we wanted, we need to go in and change it, you can go in and have the PM reopen the same design request, but we actually have that in the documentation as well. I have a whole wiki that explains at the very bottom, there's a section specifically on the complete status, and it says that in there. So the PMs are aware of that, and they all got training on that as well. But it is documented there too.
Okay, thank you. And related with the second question, sorry that I'm checking the message. In case there is some pressure from business to start the work, even if it is not finished, the designs, what I'm thinking is that we are going to block those epics or those stories until it is done. Is this correct?
Yeah, I mean, again, if you guys are getting pressure from people and the design isn't done, I don't know specifically who is doing that pressure, but you can say to them, we can start work on this, but there's a very real possibility we're going to have to go in and redo all this work, because if you look at the DSN, it's not set to development in progress, which means Tomas hasn't approved it, the design team hasn't approved it, the PM hasn't approved it. And if someone's giving you pushback on that and you're having issues, you can always come to me and I can talk with Ray and Paul about it and see if we can apply some pressure to that person. Because usually when I've heard from Ray, he's explained things to the C-suite team and other high up stakeholders, they realize very quickly, oh, this isn't good. Like, why are we wasting all this time having people do work, prior to the design being done? Because then you guys end up reworking it anyway, and no one wants to waste their time like that. So if you have that and the person isn't listening to you when you say, no, we have to wait till the design is finalized, feel free to reach out to me and I will figure out what's going on and talk to them.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Of course.
Thank you, Laura. We have another question from Lance Jeffers. He's saying the current front-end Jira flow looks like Dev goes to QA, goes to PM accepts. The new flow is Dev, goes to QA, goes to designer, goes to PM accepts. It's like the question if that's the change that was implemented.
So from my understanding is we always start with the design if it's something new. That's how everything's been explained to me since I've started. So if it's something brand new, right, like let's say someone wants a button within the settings of Connect, then we have to create the design, and then it goes to get the PM approves it after also Tomas and the design team approve it. Then it goes to developer, and then obviously once you guys are done with your dev work, then QA does it. Then it goes back to the design team. That's my understanding. Now, I don't know exactly how you guys walk through the process and what your statuses are in the developer side. So if you want to clarify, Lance, if that answered your question or not. I could try to provide more info.
No, that was pretty much it. I was basically just trying to figure out where the design approval, so like after the initial design is finalized, and then it starts, and then the QA verifies there's no like obvious bugs. I was trying to figure out where design comes back in, whether the product manager needs to look at it, or whether after QA, design should look at it first.
Oh yeah, so okay, yeah. So at that point, that's that validate design status. So again, just on the DSN side. So QA is done after dev has done everything. Then it's QA's turn, they've done everything. QA says, okay, PM, I'm done. Because right, the PM is the liaison between all these teams. They're the one who should be managing and kind of watching the entire process, making sure everyone has what they need. So then the PM goes back to the design ticket. They change the status to that validate design, and they assign it back to the designer and say, hey, it's all done. Time for you guys to check to make sure it's all good. The designer does that last. Again, it's just kind of like an idiot check to make sure no one missed anything. They open any bugs that are necessary. They close it. Boom, design is done. So then you're right that if there are bugs that are open, you guys as developers would have to go in and possibly QA as well, look at those bugs, retest, and then do it. So you're right. If there are bugs, then it's kind of circular.
Yeah, that's expected. So it sounds like then after QA, because I'm thinking like how we go through this within Jira, for example. So it sounds like QA is done. They would assign it to the product manager, and the product manager will deal with design and get their, final sign off on the produced engineering work. It's not something that QA would not assign it directly to the designer.
No. The PM should be doing that for them, because again, the PM is the one who opened the design ticket. So they're
cool.
Going back and forth between all those tickets to manage the process.
Works for me. Thanks.
Of course.
Thank you, Lance. Any other questions, team? You can just, Miguel. Hello. You can just unmute yourself, Miguel. Like this more like casual conversation.
Hi, Laura. Nice to meet you. It's Miguel Pliego from Mexico.
Hi.
I'm recently joined the team, and I have a kind of confusion. But you mentioned PM, you refer to product management, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Thank you for clarification.
Of course. Yeah. We have project managers, program managers, product managers, but the devs, from my understanding, are mostly dealing with the product managers. But then, of course, you have project managers that kind of manage multiple dev teams. So the product managers are the ones who are going back and forth as that carrier pigeon between the various teams, basically.
Awesome.
Obviously, with a lot more nuance. Yes.
Yeah, I was getting concerned if it's something that I must do, right? I mean, to have it on the loop, but thank you for clarification.
Of course. Do we have a way for designers to see and interact with our existing components? Yes. Okay. So the design team actually, there's a couple of people who have been the primary ones working on the design components. And this is a effort that there's a couple of people assigned from the development team. I believe Enrique is one of them, who work directly with a small group of the designers to update Storybook and get those components added. So that is a whole... Thanks, Lance. Yes, it is Enrique. So they have that already going, and they are working on that. And our team actually recently has been discussing assigning a couple of people to have that be a better chunk of their time each week, is to work on that. So we're just starting to test that out and see if that'll be a good process for our team. So yes, the designers are working on that, a couple of them, and a couple of the developers are working on that completely, and that is being updated. And actually, I think Enrique just did a talk, was it last week, Norma, on that? And it's probably posted if you were interested in watching that.
Yeah, he did. He did a talk about the library that he created with design, the component library. So that blog post is already available on Confluence. I'm going to share the link very quick here. And we have another question from Raj.
Oh, okay, here we go. Can the QA contact designers? Heck yes. Please do, Raj. If you guys have questions, yes, mention the designers. Again, because when it's in development in progress, they're not looking at it. So within the Epic or your own QA tickets, make sure you mention them, or go in, set up a calendar appointment. Their calendars are always up to date. And just add a little note, though, to explain, like, hey, I'm a QA. I'm working on this design request. I have questions. Can you meet with me for half an hour or whatever? And they're happy to do that. And Lance, yes, you are correct. They should be. I'm hoping the Figma links are in the prod dev tickets, but if they're not, you can always look at the DSN and grab it from there as well. But you are right. The PM should also be moving it into the prod dev normally. And yes, as David mentioned, QA and developers can definitely be involved earlier on in the design process because the designers are happy to have that feedback, especially if they're not sure if something's actually going to be feasible or not from a development perspective. And does anyone else have any questions or want me to clarify anything?
I think there was a comment from Lance. It just says Figma links should be in the engineering tickets, prod dev tickets.
Yep.
Sorry, was just pasting the link. Okay, so thank you, Laura. We have a lot of thank yous about a lot of comments about this being a great presentation. Thank you so much for doing this and with such an early because I know you're super new to Nextiva, so I'm really thankful for that. I know I already said that. So thank you so much, team, for joining this presentation. As we said, the video, the presentation, everything will be available on Confluence, hopefully between tomorrow and Monday. So thank you so much. I don't know, Laura, do you want to add anything else?
No, definitely. Like I mentioned, just that there's super helpful links at the very last slide of the presentation, so be sure to check those out. But if you guys as QAs or devs ever have questions about where's the documentation for that or how does that work, feel free to reach out to me, and I've probably already written about it or done a video on it, so I can send you that information. Or also do team meetings with people if they need further info.
Sounds amazing. Okay, thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the day. I don't know whatever you are. Have a rest of the Thursday. Thank you. Bye-bye. See you in the next one.